Good. Well, thank you. As Kevin said earlier, we're starting our new series in Ruth. So our reading for today is from the Ruth 1 to 18. In the days when the judges ruled in Israel, a severe famine came upon the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah left his home and went to live in the country of Moab, taking his wife and his 2 sons with him. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife was Naomi. Their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. When they reached Moab, they settled there. Then Elimelech died, and Naomi was left alone with her 2 sons. The 2 sons married Moabite women. One married a woman named Orpah, and the other married a woman named Ruth. But about 10 years later, both Mahlon and Chilion died. This left Naomi alone without her sons or her husband. Then Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops once again. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law got ready to leave Moab to return to her homeland. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she set out from the place where she had been living, and they took the road that would lead them back to Judah. But on the way, Naomi said to them, to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back to your mother's home, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. May the Lord bless you with security of another marriage." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. "No," they said, "we want to go with you to your people." But Naomi replied, "Why should you go with me? Can I still give birth to other sons who would grow up to be your husbands? No, my daughters, return to your parents' home, for I am too old to marry again. And even if it were possible and I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you wait for them to grow up and refuse to marry someone else? Well, no, of course not, my daughters. Things are far more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me." And again they wept together, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. "Look," Naomi said to her, "your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same." But Ruth replied, "Don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us." When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more. The word of the Lord.
I think God is often at work in the margins of life, those places we don't like to go or think about or experience or look at. The margins of life. God is often at work there. Now, margins are those little leftover spaces that we have in our lives that we don't like to look at, but sometimes we enter them when we don't want to. Some of us know about financial margins in our lives, that small gap between expense and what we have left over. It becomes a margin. Some of us know about emotional margins, where we have little energy left to deal with life changes because we're on the margins with our emotions. We don't feel like there's much left. Some of us know about being on the social margins, where we feel we don't quite fit in. We're on the outside, just on the perimeter. Maybe lonely. We also know about spiritual margins, Those margins where we may be at different places in our life where we feel mad at God and feel like we're in spiritual pain and we've been left alone and deserted and we're hurt and wounding. Now, I do think I've stepped into those margins in my life now and then. And from those margins, I've seen things differently. They've been times of growth for me to be in those margins. I don't like it. But as I've thought of it and read Ruth, I've realized I have had it pretty easy in my life. Those margins are pretty big compared to the margins in the book of Ruth. So we're starting this series in the book of Ruth. And the book of Ruth is about life on the margins. It contains this unthinkable brokenness and suffering. And I want to point out, because it's not known for this, I would say more than the book of Job. More brokenness and suffering than the book of Job. We're going to unpack that today. Ruth is God working in the margins of life, those places that we don't want to go to, in and through people on the margins. Now, I prefer my margins to stay right where they are, out of sight, on the perimeter, so I don't have to see them. That's where I like my margins, over there. When the margins move to the center, I don't know what to do. And it's very uncomfortable. Now today, I think we are aware in our world of margins moving to the center. We're aware and feeling emotions of unsettledness and difficulty and maybe even fear about what's happening in the world. We look across the ocean and we see people suffering and dying in wars and turmoil. And that margin is right in the center of our lives. It's right in our sight. So we see this margin and we ask, why? If there is a God, why is there pain and suffering in the world? It always seems like this. Someone that we know has experienced loss or gone through tragedy. And if it's not you, it will be someone that you know right now who is walking through pain and loss. And it doesn't make sense. People lose their children, they lose loved ones. And we see this margin and we ask why. Why do bad things happen to good people? Sometimes it's just that life doesn't seem to be going that well. Nothing seems to be working out. Dreams and ambitions of youth become the disappointments of old age. We see this margin and ask, why? Why is God mad at me? Now, the book of Ruth challenges us to a change of focus a bit and shifts us to ask not why, but where. Not why is God doing this, but where is God in this? Where is God when things are broken? That is the question that this book asks and answers. We get an answer that is unsurprising. It's a reminder of something we already know but are uncomfortable with and we completely forget. Where is God when things are broken? He is right there in the brokenness. He is in the margins that we don't like to look at. The book of Ruth is a story about God working in the margins in the lives of ordinary people and God working through them in their brokenness. And we have to pay really careful attention to the first 5 verses because the first 5 verses in this book are packed with 5 lifetimes of pain. It's very condensed. And for us to understand this book, we must take ourselves out of our North American context. It's a bit of hard work. And enter into this different world of patriarchy, Middle East setting, and understand it differently. It is completely different from ours. And if we want to catch this book, we have to set things aside and move into that world. The first people to read this book or hear this knew, when they read these first 5 verses, they knew about the absolute desperation and catastrophe of those first 5 verses. We think it's a bit sad. There's a distance for us from this, both geographically, chronologically, and culturally. We need to unpack it and understand this book and see what God is doing in it. So the story starts with a family of 4. And I think they're a normal family. I think they come home and there's fresh baked bread and some lentil stew. Maybe they play a board game or two. 2 boys, mom and dad. They seem like a normal family. Mom's name is Naomi, dad is Elimelech. And they have 2 boys, Mahlon and Chilion. Yet, this family that was so normal is now desperate. This is the time they live in. The book of Ruth starts by setting this for us. It is in the time of judges. Now, when we hear that, that should be like, whoa, what does that mean, the time of judges? That's interesting. So remember, judges were a time of chaos and turmoil in Israel, where everyone did what was right in their own eyes, and raiders came and went and conquered and left for centuries. Centuries of this turmoil in the land. It was a cycle of violence and invasion and loss, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And it was a long time for this. Hundreds and hundreds of years. That's hard for us to imagine, right? Hundreds and hundreds of years of this. And these are people that came into the promised land. So from their entry into the promised land with Joshua to King Saul is the time of Judges. That's a big gap, and this is where this story takes place. Several centuries of turmoil. Now, we think the world feels out of order. We think things feel bad. But whatever you feel, I want you to imagine that it was way, way worse. Centuries of cycles of violence and destruction and repentance and sin and lawlessness. They had no end in sight. They lived in unprecedented troubled times. So it's in these times of political and social unrest, danger and pressure that this family lives, and they try to make a go of it. To go to work and be good people. Maybe buy a horse for the kids, maybe a pony or a donkey, who knows? They're saving up. They love each other. They have friends over for dinner. Yet things get worse. There's a famine in the land. And I don't know we get this, because I'm thinking, when I hear famine, I'm like, oh, I've got to turn my sprinklers from 3 days a week to 2. This really is bad news for me. Or we go back and we go, you know, I remember famine. I remember when there was no yeast and flour in the stores. That was bad. And then I went and tried to get toilet paper, and there's no toilet paper. I get it. I get this book of Ruth. It was a bad time. But it was way worse. There were no stores to go to. There was no food for years. I mean, if they were walking along a path and they saw a scrubby potato in the field, they would pick it up and celebrate. Or a shriveled apple in the trees they're walking by, that would be something to write home about. It was scarce, and they were desperate. People were completely desperate, so desperate that this family left Israel. So these are people of the promise, people who entered the promised land, leaving the promised land because they are so desperate. It's their identity. The land is their identity. It's their homeland. And they leave and they go to a foreign land. And they left with nothing. Nothing. They went to the land of Moab. Moab is a pagan country. In Judges it says Moab had dominated Israel for 18 years. It's a long time. 18 years of domination from Moab. So they were desperate. They went to Moab. They left everything behind and they went for food. People that are hungry do desperate things. They were refugees. This family is a family of refugees in Moab. It's desperation, and it's a complete reversal of what was supposed to be. I want you to think it's kind of like this, that things get so bad here for us in North America that we have to actually go to the Middle East as refugees to live. That's what it was like. They're refugees in Moab, and they settle there, and they had no choice. And like many who leave their homeland displaced by war, famine, and persecution, they're so desperate to leave. You know, we know this story, right? People come to North America because it's this land of plenty. It's this land of hope that they see relief from their struggle. They come as refugees, powerless, people that are immigrants on the margins, on the edges of society. And they settle here feeling that they're not quite at home when they come to North America. Never quite forgetting home. I've never quite got this because I've never been in that situation, but I remember friends in Edmonton who were either new Canadians or refugees, and they would say, yeah, I'm really excited I'm going back to my country. And I always felt a little annoyed at that, a little tinge. What do you mean, you're a country? Isn't Canada your country? Aren't you a good Canadian? I don't think I really understood the place of homeland for people in their lives and the longing for it that people have. So they never quite forget home. So this family of 4 Israelites settled in Moab. It must have been unsettling for them. And then this happens. Dad dies. Elimelech dies. We don't know what happened. It just says he dies. It's kind of a big deal. Dad dies. There's a lot of pain and emotion and loss and powerlessness in that statement. Naomi is left on the margins in a foreign land without her husband with 2 boys. And the good news is they're now young men, probably 13 to 17, and they're ready for marriage. So this is good. This is good news. You can build a family. I've got 2 boys. So they marry 2 Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah, who are probably also 13 to 15. They're married, notice this, they're married for 10 years. 10 years of marriage is a long time to live and love together. And then both Mahlon and Chilion die. There's no explanation, just gone. 10 years of marriage. So here's what Naomi is left with. She is left with her 2 Moabite daughters-in-law. Now here's the really big thing that we need to hear about this to really get this. This is hard work. In the times of patriarchy, this meant that she has nothing. It's hard to hear, I know. This is the world the way it was. She is left with nothing. Hear this like an Israelite reading this story. She has lost her inheritance, her future, and her descendants with the loss of all the males in her family. There is no future for her. She has lost all power, all influence, all status. So Naomi is absolutely desperate. She is at the very bottom of the social ladder in a foreign land. She is a 0 on the scale of agency and power. She's at the very edge of the margins. And this is where the really hard work of understanding this culture happens, because to get it, what God did, we need to understand this, because we'll see what God did in the brokenness and marginalization of people who were on the margins. These were powerless people that God worked through. It's the Old Testament patriarchy. God, the Bible doesn't defend it. It just is all through the Middle East. This is the way it is. And the most crucial piece to understand is that what God is doing and what the book of Ruth is telling us is that the main characters in this story could not be any lower in status or power. They could not be any lower in a society. They are the very bottom rung people. I want to tell you about the system a bit this whole time. Women get their value from men and their family. And if they are unattached to men, they are nothing. They have nothing. So deaths of her sons represents a complete destruction of her life. And there's more. Okay, so get this. Her sons married Moabite women. That's kind of weird. Ruth and Orpah were married to refugees. That's revealing. Moabite women marrying refugees coming into the country. So marriage was a time to advance your family. The father wanted to find a marriage that would actually raise their status and wealth in the society. So he'd go busily trying to find someone to marry his daughters to. This Moabite family marrying daughters of a refugee family is a big red flag. And it tells us this, that Ruth and Orpah were also on the very lowest of the social structure in Moabite society. They were the very bottom. This is marrying down. So for Naomi, no Israelite woman envisions her sons marrying pagan foreigners. This is not the dream. They feared pagan influence. Exodus and Leviticus is full of this. Don't marry pagan foreigners. Just don't do it. It's wrong. Her daughters-in-law were likely, like everyone else in Moab, worshippers of Chemosh, described as the detestable deity of Moab. But there's more margin here. Remember, women's value is in childbearing, and in particular, giving birth to sons. They were married to her sons for 10 years and produced no children. In particular, no sons. And in that culture, even though it may have been the male's fault, it didn't matter. The women were called barren. Ruth and Orpah are barren women on the lowest rung of society. They have no value. There's a profound level of broken here and margin. These women are on the very farthest edge of the margin. So there's an important central theme in the book of Ruth that I want to point out. There's two reactions to this margin. One is a question of why. Why is this happening? And the other is a question of where. Where is God? The whole book of Ruth revolves around these questions. Why is this happening and where is God? Naomi reacts to the margins by asking why. You know, they hear that things are going well again in Israel. Bethlehem has had a harvest. Bethlehem is again the house of bread. That's what the name means. It's the house of bread again. You can go there and get food. The famine's finally over. But all she has left is this memory of home. And like refugees have this memory, she wants to go home. She's longing for it. She wants to go live out her days in sorrow in her homeland. There are two laws that weave through the book of Ruth. One is the Levirate law, and the other one's called kinsman redeemer. They're two separate laws that we need to keep separate, but understand in this book. They're crucial to understand this desperate situation. The Levirate law was this. A brother marries the wife of a deceased brother to give them progeny, descendants, to carry on their name. That's Levirate law. Naomi has no brother-in-law to do that. And then there's a kinsman redeemer law as well, which is separate, but it gets collided in Ruth. The land could be bought back, your family homeland could be bought back by a male relative. So hopefully, if there's a living male relative, they can buy the land for Naomi and family. But no, this is the problem with the kinsman redeemer law. The law would then pass to the closest living male relative and move out of Naomi's family. She has no male relatives. Even if it was bought back, as soon as she died, it would go to another family. There is no future. So they leave, the three of them. They have this long, dark walk back to Bethlehem. And it's clear that Naomi isn't doing well. Do you blame her? She's not doing well. She tells her daughters-in-law to go home. May God bless you. Go back to your homes. You've been so faithful. Return to your parents' homes. May the Lord bless you with another marriage. A very kind thing to say. Maybe a bit naive, but kind. It says they all weep. They loved each other. No, we want to stay with you. We want to be faithful. We want to be loyal to you. Both of them wanted to stay with her. She was all they had. But she says, no, there's nothing for us. There's nothing for you with me. And the truth is, there was nothing. Because a barren woman going back to Bethlehem, having tried for 10 years to have children, also being a foreigner, a Moabite, is not a popular catch. They are on the bottom of the social ladder. The chances of someone wanting to marry Ruth or Orpah are zero. The chances of someone wanting to marry Naomi are zero. She's past childbearing age. Zero. The best they could hope for was maybe to be a second or third wife that helps around the house. And this is where Naomi, completely on the margin, starts asking why. This is what she says in Ruth 1:13. Things are far more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me. See, Naomi is broken, and she points her finger at God and asks why. It's a key statement in this book. Pay attention. This is the why question. Why is this happening to me? Why is there suffering? Because God has turned against me. God has raised his fist against me. God is doing this to me. God is punishing me. God is getting revenge on me for something I have done. Why is there suffering in the world? Because God is not good after all. But I want to remind you that nowhere in the story is Naomi condemned for that. Nowhere is she condemned for that authentic statement of her loss and her pain. And it's okay to be mad at God. That's what we learn here. The Psalms are full of David and others being mad at God. He can take it. He's too small if he can't take it. He can take it. And maybe you've been there. You relate to Naomi, where you're just looking at God and you're mad and you're wondering why. It doesn't seem fair or right. I've been there in times of disappointment and loss of family members, and I just didn't understand, why, God, would you do this? It's not right. This makes no sense. Are you good after all? The book of Ruth answers this question without answering the question. God, why is this happening? This is how it answers the question. Where is God is the right question. Look at where God is. So Orpah leaves. Don't be mad at her. You would have left too. We actually would have all said, of course you leave. Duh. Don't be stupid. Of course you're going back home. There's nothing for you in Bethlehem. This is the common sense thing to do, Orpah. She made the right decision. Ruth made the wrong decision. Orpah was smart. She left. Naomi says, look, your sister-in-law is gone. You should go too. And this is the big surprise in the book. And it's a surprise because Orpah's decision made sense, right? This is why it's a surprise. It doesn't make sense. Ruth stays. Ruth enters the margins. She says, where? Where is God? Not why, but where? This girl, this pagan girl, worshiper of Chemosh, who has no prospects, no power, no agency, is the one who shows God in the margins to Naomi and to us. She displays something for us to see about God's work in our lives. It's fascinating. This is what she says. I'm going to stay with you. I will not leave. These are some of the most powerful words in Scripture in Ruth 1:16. Don't ask me to leave you or turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Ruth is in the margins. She couldn't be more in the margins. You know, in the biblical criteria for people that are at risk on the margins, she meets all four criteria. The Bible is concerned about four categories of vulnerable people: the widow, the poor, the refugee, and the orphan. She's all of those. And instead of asking why, she decides where. I will stay with you. Where? In the margin. So, she goes with her to Bethlehem, from margin to margin. Remember, she's going back to Bethlehem as a Moabite, barren refugee. It would be like coming to North America as a single Muslim woman. She's not naive. She's not confused. She knows all about what she's doing. She knows the decision she's making. She says, I will stay with you, not only, and this is the shocking part, I will follow your God. This is Ruth 1:16b, second part of 16. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. So Ruth's conversion, she converts to the God of Israel here. This conversion is actually history-altering conversion. It's like Moses in the burning bush, or Saul on the road to Damascus. It's like Abraham's response to God, except that Ruth doesn't get any visions or words or promises. She gets nothing of that. Yet she does this. She does it without hearing God's voice. She steps forward into the margins. And I think Naomi sees something, a faithfulness and a hope and a decision to love that can only point to God. That's the only explanation for this. Can you see it? What's being displayed here? Where it's pointing? That's God's love in the margins. It's what we're supposed to see in this story, that God's love is in the margins. We're supposed to see the faithfulness in Ruth. And Ruth tells us about God's faithfulness in the broken, where God is. Not why, but where. Where is God when things are broken? He is there in the margin, working in and through the lives of people on the margins. Ruth's response is the answer to brokenness in the Bible. It displays this. And it's a surprise. In brokenness of life and hopelessness, hope and healing come from the margins. And this is for us today. God enters the margins and wants us to enter the margins, those hard places we don't want to look at. It's the mystery of God's presence in brokenness. Can I remind you that Jesus lived in the margins? He was a person of margins, poor, rejected, and suffering, and he went into the margins with the poor, the marginalized, the tax collectors, the weak, and the broken. A person of the margins went into the margins. Jesus goes into brokenness. That's why he is called Emmanuel, God with us in the brokenness of life. It's what the incarnation is about, the coming of God into human form. I am with you. I'm in the brokenness. I'm in the gap, in the hurting. We don't get a why answer, but we get a where answer. I am with you. Where is God in this mess? It's in the margins. God is often at work in the margins of life. And it's the surprise of the gospel. Margins are the places we don't want to go or look, yet they're the places we see God the most clearly. It's where God is. The Bible's full of this. Psalm 34:18, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Even Matthew is full of it. Matthew 25:34-36. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. God is there. He's in the margins. He's told us that. And those are the places I like to avoid. They're the places we like to avoid because they're places of brokenness and pain. Look and see. Seek and find. Open the door and go in. You know the why and the where? The why is stationary. It doesn't move. The where? It helps us to go and see and heal. Now, let me give you an example. I always lose my wallet and my keys. And it happens so often, and I always ask this question, why are my keys not in the drawer? Now, I could sit there and ponder the answer to that question. Why are they not in that drawer? Let's see, metaphysically, what does that mean? But really, it's not the right question. The right question is, where are my keys? That is the right question to ask. It's more important than why, because it allows us to seek and find and change something about our lives. And it tells us where God is in his love for us and who he is and how he lives in our lives and reaches out to others. God meets us in the margins. So, can you ask yourself, where are your margins today? Where are your margins? And where is God in those margins? See, that is a question of faith. It's a question of expectation. Where is God? Presumes that God is somewhere. Where is God in the margins? God has met me in the margins in my life. There have been times when I've been in the financial margins. And things have just happened that I can't explain. Money has showed up, and I thought, that's God meeting me in the margins. And in the margins, I see God the most clearly. When I've been hurting the most spiritually broken, is when God meets me the most powerfully. Those are the margins that God meets me in. And you all have some, and this is a reminder to look and ask where. Where is God in this? And the where question will change you more than the answer to why. Loss, pain, depression, anxiety, fear, doubt, chaos, poverty. Those are some of the margins of life. And this is what Jesus says. He says, I am with you in those spaces. That is where I am and where you see me most clearly. Look and see and go. Seek and you shall find. Because in the margins, in the mess, in the muck, in the brokenness, this is where you will see Jesus.